Where I come from, when we greet one another, we say bonjour, so bonjour.
Bonjour.
Hassan Yenas Kwe and Dejnakas, Makwa Dodam, Batchewana Bay Dunjaba. My spirit name is Shooting Star Woman. I'm Bear Clan, and I originally come from Batchewana Bay, Ontario, which is on beautiful Lake Superior. And I'm very honored to be here to share some of the teachings that I've learned throughout my lifetime. And most of that time I've been with this guy here. We've been together for over 50 years. We've been legally married for almost 46 years, going on 46. And together we have sat in many ceremonies and traveled many, many miles to sit with the elders of different nations. When I was a young girl, I always wanted to know the teachings of my people, but where I grew up, it was influenced by the residential school, so we didn't know our traditional way of life. So they say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and we had many teachers appear in our lives, and still we do today.
Hassan Yenas, Indigenous, Killdeer Dodam, Six Nations, Grand River, Dinjiba. My spirit name is Hassan Yenas, Dan Smoke. I'm a member of the Killdeer Clan. That's this Sandpiper family member. And I'm a member of the Seneca Nation, Six Nations, Grand River Territory. Very happy to be here. The Great Lakes watershed has always been a home to our people, as well as New York State and around there, because it's just, we're agricultural people, so this is prime, fertile agricultural territory. So we've always been benefiting from this land. So we just want to give thanks for this opportunity to share with all of you.
Our people have always looked upon Mother Nature, and we did ceremonies out there by the water. We did ceremonies everywhere, and we always watched the animals and the insects, and we could learn from them. You know, like if a caterpillar, if it has many black stripes, it's going to be a long winter. You know, those little hints out there. Well, yesterday I heard from a young elder, and he was telling me that the grouse usually makes their nests on the ground, but because the earth is getting warmer, they started making their nests in the trees. So we have to start paying attention to the messages that we're getting from the animal life and from the natural world. And so Dan and I were so fortunate to have such an amazing opportunity to share our story and our way of life and the words of the elders on our radio show, Smoke Signals, and we're going to share more with you later on.
Oh.
Miigwech and Niawe, Dan and Mary Lou, for your wonderful words and for opening this event in a good way. I'm Pauline Wakeham, a professor in the Department of English and Writing Studies at Western, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for this event we're calling Resurgent Airwaves, a celebration of Indigenous radio. This afternoon, we're paying tribute to the importance, vitality, and creativity of Indigenous radio across Turtle Island, and more specifically, right here on the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoek, and Chinantan peoples. Dan and Mary Lou, who you've just heard from, have dedicated their lives to uplifting the voices of Indigenous peoples. In the midst of the land reclamation at Kanehsatake in 1990, or what the mainstream media called the Oka Crisis, Dan and Mary Lou were invited onto Western's campus radio station to offer much-needed Indigenous perspectives. The knowledge that the Smokes shared that day was so compelling that they were asked to return, and before long, the Smoke Signals radio show was born. This long-running program reached both Indigenous and non-Indigenous listeners for decades, sharing the brilliance of Indigenous arts and music and reporting on Indigenous news and events. Then in 2018, the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western embarked upon a collaborative project with the Smokes to digitize all of the tapes from their radio programs over the years and to create an online archive that would provide new generations of listeners with access to this remarkable legacy of the Smoke Signals radio show. So the creation of this digital archive has been led by former FIMS graduate librarian Marnie Harrington, who is here with us today, and professor at FIMS Paulette Rothbauer, who is also here with us today. And so one of the things we want to share with you today is the online archive, where you can go and listen to past episodes from over the decades and hear more of the wonderful words of Dan and Mary Lou and their guest speakers. And so after the event, Paulette will be out in the foyer with a laptop, and she'll be able to show people how to access the archive and how to download links to learn more about it. Later in our program, we are also very fortunate to hear from Kathleen Buddle, who is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Manitoba, and she's going to be joining us via Zoom. She's a longtime friend and supporter of Dan and Mary Lou, and she's a researcher with expertise in Indigenous communications histories and media cultures. And she's going to join us to speak about the significance of Indigenous radio, and more specifically, the importance of the Smoke Signals radio show. We will also later hear from Finn Rose, who is sitting over there. Finn is a fourth-year undergraduate student in the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities at Western, who has dedicated great time and expertise to digitizing Dan and Mary Lou's print journalism. So in addition to their work in radio, Dan and Mary Lou were prolific contributors to newspapers from across Turtle Island for many decades. They kept copies of these newspapers in boxes in their basement for years, generating what has become a truly rare and remarkable archive of Indigenous journalism written by and for Indigenous communities. And Paulette Rothbauer and the team at FIMS has graciously allowed me to collaborate with them on extending the Smoke Signals radio show archive to include a selection of the Smoke's print journalism. And Finn has been very crucial to this work, and they also were the driving force behind the exhibit that you see out in the foyer as you entered. Last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce January Rogers, our first speaker this afternoon. January is a multi-talented, multimedia Mohawk and Tuscarora artist from 6 nations of the Grand River who works in page poetry, spoken word performance poetry, video poetry, and recorded poetry with music. She has won the American Indian Film Festival Best Music Video 2020 for Ego of a Nation, and the Imaginative Best Experimental Sound Prize 2021 for her sound piece, The Struggle Within. She is currently the writer-in-residence at Western and at the London Public Library. And in addition to all of these talents, January also has a long history in radio, including her production of a radio documentary titled Indians on the Airwaves, as well as the 10-episode web series she recently wrote and produced of the same name. So I'm going to turn things over to January now.
Yawagoa, thank you. Thanks for the intro, and thank you for opening and welcoming us all here today, Dan and Mary Lou. I'm so excited to talk about radio today. Radio is something that has captured my passions because when I think about radio, I think about it as not only existing in the air and traveling around in the ethers and things like that. It comes from the ground as well. It comes from underneath the ground as well. The airwaves and all of the transmissions, the audio transmissions, are all around us at all times. And I think of it as territory. And if I think of it as territory, then I think of where is our territory in the scope of things. And I'm talking about Indigenous people. And so when And I grew up with radio. My mother and my father were actually huge radio fans, and I think I was brought up properly on that really good music from down in the U.S. U.S. Radio has, I was brought up on all of that good Motown music, which is not far from here, Detroit. But we were listening to stations from Buffalo, New York, WUFO FM, as I remember. Anyway, so that kind of a tradition of keeping the radio on in all the rooms in the house has carried over into my adult life, and I started to work in radio because I believed that, again, we as Indigenous people deserved a place within the scope of that media. And I'll tell you how I started in radio. This is a true story. Open your minds. So I was living for 25 years as a guest on Coast Salish territory, and I had some affiliations with the University of Victoria. And there was a couple of buddies of mine who were students at the university. One is Will George, who is actually a descendant of Chief Dan George, and a nephew of the great Lee Miracle. And he had a radio show, and his co-host was Gordon Dufresne. And Gordon Dufresne was two-spirit storyteller and amazing person. Will George, they had this radio show is called Unreserved, and I used to call it Unrehearsed because it was so bad. But they did it every week, and it held a place, for our voices to be heard within that area, that region. And every now and then I knew these guys because they were also both writers. And every now and then they would invite me onto their radio show. And this was a time when, they were playing like basically one CD every show. Like they would play that Eulalie CD every show. And so anyways, when I got to do radio, I made it a Eulalie-free zone just for that sake. But anyways, it was so much fun. That's where I caught the radio bug. Like I really did. Now, William George went on to move back to his home territory in Burrard in a Burrard band outside of what is now Vancouver, British Columbia. And Gordon Dufresne left us suddenly, unexpectedly, to Spirit. And for a while there at UVic, there was no native voice on CFUV, which was the radio station, the campus community radio station out of UVic. And it was the winter of 2006, and I was sitting around, during holidays. I don't celebrate holidays, I kind of sit around, I enjoy the time off. And there was a voice that came into this ear, and it said, "You should do radio." And I thought, that's not a bad idea. And then I thought, right after the holidays, I'm going to go to UVic, I'm going to check to see what it takes to start a radio program. And because they saw the value, at CFUV, they saw the value of having Indigenous presence on the airwaves there, they kind of fast-tracked me into this program. And by February of 2007, I was on the air with my show called Native Waves Radio. And I had the show going for 10 years, up until 2017, just before I left Coast Salish territory there. But even during that time, like in the very early days, which, I wasn't making very pretty radio because I was still learning, how to work the gadgets and all of that. But I certainly had a love for speaking over the air. But even during those early days, like I was hearing some funky stuff in those headphones, man. Like I was hearing, a native male voice, a singer, a traditional singer. And I don't know where that was coming from because like we were playing ads and, PSAs and stuff, and I was hearing like these voices. So when I speak about the spirit of radio, I really mean that. Like there is a spirit to this medium called radio that is alive and tingly and very active, and I believe that's what's kept me kind of involved with radio all this time. This wonderful spirit. So, and as a writer, I do get to kind of double down on both of my loves of writing and of radio. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share just an excerpt of a poem from Totem Poles and Railroads, if that's okay with you. And I say excerpt because it's like a 4-column, 2-page poem. I don't want to take up too much time. I would rather talk about radio, but I'm going to read you this poem called The Spirit of Radio Indigenous. No ancestral line to stretch for that which exists eternal, reaching from all directions, defined, imagined, and not yet known. Simple as empty space, complex as a cluttered world, it is breath grazed against tension, raising vibrational something. What? It isn't love or hate. We find our voice with it, and with it we hear our sonic selves, living, tonal, emotional, transformational, constantly fighting against silence, being silenced. Expressions from lovely people, planting sounds, joining nature and natural vocables. Breathe, sing, air, trill, sound, call, voice, yell. Signals and psychic tapping, alerting frequencies, joining forces and airwaves with others. Listening, recovering, take heed, revealing what? Life forces influencing barometers. Why resist radio insistence, melodic deliverances? This is not spirit from where once we came. Soul-starved nations of vapid fast convulsions, impulses. Keep up. No. Slow down. Dispossessed voices coming at you. Hello. Yelling at you. Hello. Doesn't anybody even live here anymore? Let the language come to you. Voice and space, wrapping the land like a blanket, testimony to time truth, trauma reverberating up and out, healing and hearing. Beneath Earth's surface, currents above obvious, being told who we are, listening and questioning. Surviving weak signals, riding the dials, parting the particles, making our own waves with sensory assaults. Long-distance moon in Scorpio, static intentions. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air. And then, like I said, I did radio for 10 years, and then I was able to produce a 6-part radio documentary called Indians on the Airwaves, which, because I felt like there hadn't been anything archived as of yet. Now we were in the, my thing was music, and I really enjoyed sharing all of the new contemporary Native music that was just blossoming out at that time during the 10 years I was doing radio. This is an explosion of new Native music. So much so that I got to write Native music reviews for BC Musician magazine for a little while there. But also, what was, I think, if I think back of, what were those kind of really important moments in my time of doing radio, I have to say, the winter of 2012, 2013, do y'all remember what was happening then? I don't know more. I don't know more. Uprising, resistances. And when I got to announce those rallies and those marches over the airwaves, I thought, this is why I'm here. This was why radio was invented, so that we can mobilize people, And this was a revolutionary time in my consciousness. Like going, okay, it's about sharing the good vibrations of music, but also bringing the people together. That's what it was all about for me. Always was, always is. And now I hold a position. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of my res radio, CKRZ FM 100.3 on the Voice of the Grant. And I'm happy to play that role as well. But I miss doing radio very much, actually. I wish I had more time to host a radio show, because it was really something that it was meaningful to me. And I produced my first book in 2007, and that's when I started doing radio too. So writing and reading and radio have always kind of been these things that worked in parallel for me, and it's wonderful. I look forward to more of it. Nyawagoa.
Well, Dan and I were walking down a street close to where we live. We live in Northeast London, and this was when Oka was happening. And the only reason why it was called the Oka Crisis was because the reporters couldn't say Kanehsatake, Kanehsatake. They couldn't say that. So they said, well, there's a cheese factory over there. Let's call it the Oka Crisis. So people stopped us in their cars, and they pulled over to the side of the road, and they said, we want to know what you think about what's happening there. So Dan and I looked at each other. We were really amazed that anybody would really be interested in what we had to say. So we, expressed how we felt about it, hoping that nobody got killed. Like, there was already one death, but hopefully nobody else would be killed. I know the United Peacekeepers had gone over there to help, and we were listening and watching the news all the time. But at that time, we didn't know this. All the bulletins that the police issued were what the reporters in major newspapers and TVs and radios announced. Nobody went and asked the Indigenous people why they were protesting. Nobody, found out that they were protecting their ancestral burial grounds. Nobody knew that, So we had an opportunity when this young man by the name of Jeremy Price came around and asked us if we'd come on his radio show at Radio Western. I forget what the show was called, Green Waves, yeah. So we went on there for 15 minutes, and we went in with a stack of things to read because we didn't know what to do. Like, when he asked us to do that, the first thing we did was we went to our elders. We went and saw Vern Harper, and we gave him some tobacco, and he had a sweat lodge for us. And he said, they wouldn't ask you if they didn't think you could do it, And then we called up our other elder, Art Solomon, who lived up by Sudbury, and he said, you take every opportunity you can to talk about the good things that Native people do. So from that time on, we have been sharing about the culture and wisdom of our people, and we have, been on this whirlwind for the last 3 decades. We have been traveling all over the place. We traveled around the world. We've been to many ceremonies. We've been to many elders gatherings. At the beginning, we went on the Green Waves for about 6 weeks, and then the station manager, Mario Soselli, asked us if we would like to have a spot for an hour, Again, we went to the elders, and we had another sweat lodge. We called up Art Solomon, and they told us that we should do it, that this is a great opportunity. So we started, and then after about 2 months, they gave us 2 hours because we had so much stuff to share. We always had stacks of stuff ready to reference to, and we had helpers. We had people would drive us every week, come pick us up, and we had volunteers to run the board, and eventually I had to learn how to do that, and that was very traumatic for me because, there's nothing on the board that makes it easy. There's no on-off switch, they don't turn it up or turn it down or nothing, And so there's like about 100 dials on there, and you have to know which one to press and which lever to raise up. So I had to make myself little notes, like Post-it notes, but I'm too cheap to buy Post-it notes, so I just rip paper up, And so I would put it on each one that I had to use, and I had this great big one that said, don't forget to turn Dan's mic on, because I would, do everything and then have my mic on, and then Dan would be talking so you could hear him softly in the background, and somebody call up and say, we can't hear Dan. So I go like this, so I had to have that big note. But it took me a while, but I was able to do it, it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it, or when you have to do it, because nobody else was going to be able to do it, But somebody gave us a tape recorder, and so we got invited to go to the elders conferences happening in Toronto, happening in Trent, happening down in Michigan. We got invited to the 25th anniversary of the American Indian Movement. So we went traveling around with our tape recorder, and Dan did interviews everywhere we went. And so we met all these stars, like the elders. We ended up going to the Native American Music Awards in Niagara Falls, New York, and we met all the stars of our people. You know, they've been around for a long, long time, and nobody knew that they were Indigenous. Did you know that the fellow who wrote Hawaii 5-0, da 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 da, he's Indigenous. His name was Noki Edwards. He was also one of the guys who wrote the song Wipeout. Do you remember that song? Wow, you know, like we were blown away. But for many years, they had to not reveal that they were Indigenous because they just love music so much. So they were able to get in there and get those breaks. And so they kind of opened up the way for the other Indigenous people. So we became judges. We became judges for the Canadian Aboriginal Music Awards that used to take place at the Skydome Powwow. We had many roles that was all because of our radio show. You know, we got invited to Poland. We got invited to Thailand, all expenses paid. And we just went there and talked how we talk on the radio. You know, like the first time I talked on the radio, I was so nervous. And I was saying to myself, okay, just think, hardly anybody's listening out there, okay? Because it's only a 50-watt radio station, you know? And so I was still so nervous. And then they boosted up the wattage, so we were 75 watts, and we were getting to, we could be heard in Woodstock. So we were getting to the big time, right? But you never know who is listening there. And a lot of times, Dan and I would be the elders for the Native Women's Association in Ottawa or for the Kumik, and we would meet doctors and lawyers in different places, and they would say, we used to listen to smoke signals while we were doing our undergrad, you know? So that made us feel really good that they were listening to us and they were hearing the elders. Every show we did featured Sugar Bear from Walpole Island. And so I borrowed this line from him. It's, this is the way it was told to me, because there are many people in the Indigenous world who are like the culture cops, you know, so they'll come up to you and say, you're doing it wrong, you know, but there is no right or wrong way because we don't have a rule book. So I learned to say, well, this is how we do it in my way, you know, back home, this is how we do it. Or as Sugar Bear said, this is the way it was told to me. So, you know, they helped me all along the way, and the unseen world was with us as well, you know, because we went to ceremonies. We went to ceremonies every week. We went to sweat lodges, and our radio show was on a Tuesday, it was on a Thursday, it was on a Saturday, so it always got shifted around, and then for the last, 15 years, it's been Sunday night, eh? So we always had the opportunity to get there, and it is a big commitment, because you have to be there every single week because it's a live show, and we don't rehearse the show before we go in. I have a big old ladies bag with wheels on it now. That's what I carry the CDs in now. I used to carry it in shopping bags, but when we started off, we had one cassette. It was Joanne Shenandoah and Paul Ortega. So we played them over and over again, just like your experience. And so we learned about this thing that's called a contra. And so if you wrote to a recording artist and you said, you know, we have a radio show, would you send us a copy and we'll play it on the radio show and we'll review it, or, you know, just say your name, you know, give you credit for it. So we started getting music coming in the mail, and we ended up getting a lot of music. So we very rarely played Joanne Shenandoah or Paul Ortega, but they're still very dear in our heart.
Chimiquets, Mary Lou. Yes, Mary Lou summarized a lot of the actual experience that we had starting in 1990. September 1990 is when we began, because the Oneida people from outside of London here, they rallied to and responded to the call by the Kanehsatake Mohawks and the Ganawage Mohawks for help, for unity, to come and support them, and because they needed it. And so the call went out right across Canada, United States, right down to the Central and South America. But it was the locals from here who went. And so when they came back, they started wanting to talk about it, and we said, hey, we got this radio show. You want to come and talk on it on the radio show? Come and talk with us. We'll interview you. We'll ask questions, and you provide us with your answers and what's going on the ground. And they did. Then we found out from a radio station owner who owned a radio station down around Niagara on the Lake. It was a country and western station she owned. And she said that she had contact at the Kanehsatake community radio station. I didn't even know they had a community radio station there. So she put us in contact with them. Next thing I know, we're broadcasting discourse back and forth between us live on the air, so that for the benefit of our listeners and the benefit of us, because we were listening and we were talking to them face to face. And eventually they came to London. They came to visit us here in London. And I think about a year later, after Kanehsatake happened, we planted a tree of peace. And Mary Lou and I tried to help organize it, but it finally got planted. And it's been there since July 11th, 1991. So it just celebrated a 31-year anniversary this year, next to the Peace Garden, right down by the Forks of the Thames. So we're really, we're so happy about that, because we always have a prayer circle every anniversary, and we always bring in someone who was at Kanehsatake, someone who was right there on the ground, right from the beginning, and they're still around. And we come and we get them to come and talk a little bit about that and how things have changed. So it's been a really exciting time for us to be involved in radio, because radio is so it's like they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in our territories, and like Mary Lou and I, we found out that what we're doing is actually a form of storytelling. We didn't even know that till Lenore Kishik Tobias told us. She says, "You know what you guys do is storytelling, and it's very honorable what you do." And I says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, there's 4 types of storytelling. There's the traditional storytelling about Nana Bujo, about the different stories about the raven, about the really interesting stories. They're kind of morality tales, but they're all stories about traditional Indigenous place, wherever the sources are. It's about the morality in those territories." Then she said that there are the oral historians, the ones who can read the wampum belts, the ones who can read the birch bark scrolls, because we would always record our covenants, our treaties. We would record anything that really happened that was very important. We'd record them on those. And so we have historians, oral historians, who can still read them and study them and let us know what they said. Back in the day, they used to recite them every year so that everyone knew them. Everyone in the community knew what was happening, what those treaties meant. But today it's very rarely that you ever get the opportunity to hear a wampum belt being read in front of you by someone who can do that. Another form of storytelling was the orators. As you probably are aware, we have a number of orators out there, and they're the ones that as soon as they speak, you just gravitate to them. It's almost like they're oral magnets, and you want to hear what they have to say. And what they have to say usually are very good for us to hear. I remember Tom Porter, Sago Guninguas from Akwesasne. I remember he captivated me that way. And I says, the way you speak and the way you talk about such simple things, really, I find it very amazing. He says it all comes from nature. That's all I'm doing. I'm just talking on behalf of nature, because nature doesn't have that voice. So I do that. So I thought, that's keeping it very simple. Not too complicated, not too analytical. And I says, I think that would be a good way to do it. And so that's when I thought about radio, that's what we do. We're basically doing that. And then there's the other storytelling where you try to tell stories about what's happening all over Turtle Island, what's happening down in South America, what's happening wherever Indigenous people are, Africa, New Zealand, and you just tell, what they tell you, what their stories are. The music, as January said, is just, it's, like she said, it's booming. It really, really is. I couldn't believe, once the Junos began in 1994, we had a big launch at the Native Canadian Centre in Toronto. And Gary Farmer was there, Lawrence Martin was there. He was the very first recipient of the Juno Award, Indigenous Artist. And, like Mary Lou and I got right involved because we were already doing a radio show, and they thought we were perfect to be either sitting on the committee or sitting as a judge. So that's what we did. We did that for the next, we just stepped down just last year because it just got to be a little bit, it started becoming quite, we were getting too busy because as both January and Mary Lou have said, radio really started to take on a life of its own. Not only were we doing radio, but that kind of thrust us into print media, as Pauline was telling you, and then we got involved into television media, the local TV station. I don't know if you've ever seen our Spoke Signal segment on it was owned by Bayton Broadcasting, then it was owned by Chum, then it was owned by City TV, now it's owned by Bell Media. So we went through all those owners, and every time that they had to renew their CRTC license, who do you think they came to to do a positive intervention? Well, it was us. And I remember one of the first times we did it, I think it was Chum, City TV, and owned the TV station, and they asked us if we would do that. So we went to Gatineau, we went to the CRTC, appeared before the commissioners, and we did our little way of speaking. Mary Lou would say a sentence, I would say a sentence, back and forth. Anyways, everyone got 10 minutes. As soon as 10 minutes was up, the hammer went down, and that was it. You were cut off. No more. If anything more, you had to submit it in writing. So Mary Lou got this idea. She says, well, you know what? I'm going to sing an honor song to all these people in the room here because they're all storytellers. And we know how much honor our people give us as storytellers. So we're going to sing an honor song to them, and we're going to, let them know why we're doing it. So we got up and we started singing. Well, actually, after about 5-6 minutes of our oral submission, Mary Lou introduced the honor song. We asked them all to stand. They all stood. And next thing I know, we're singing. And we thought at 10 minutes they were going to cut us off. But they didn't. They didn't. They just let us keep singing right to the end of the song. And Mary Lou, I think, actually extended the song because it went a long time. It was, it was really good. It was almost like we have this tradition of blowing an eagle whistle. And when the person who blows the eagle whistle blows it at you, that means they want you to sing that song, or that song with another 4 verses. So Mary Lou, I think, probably took that really to heart, So we're sitting there, and then finally, when we finished the song, we asked everyone to have a seat, and we sat down. And then all the CRTC commissioners all got up and gave us an applause. They had probably never seen that before, and we never experienced that before. That was the first time ever before a CRTC commission. And then Moses Neimer comes up to us and says to us, they never do that. Never. I've never seen that. And so we thought, wow, this, we didn't know that in our own little way we were indigenizing how the CRTC renews contracts for television. They probably do that with radio and everything else as well. But we never were asked to do that for CHRW. Not yet, yes, that's right, yes. So, but we've been having a really fun time. It's, we started off just not knowing anything until the program in journalism for Native people at the journalism school at Western. The PJNP program ran for 10 years, from 1980 to 1990. And during that time, they graduated about 400 PJNP certificate holders. A lot of them are working at APTN or working in media in their own home communities, but a lot of them are just writing grant proposals or being office managers. They never got to get into a newsroom because there was no budget for them. So so this one local fella who was actually an award-winning columnist, Bud Whiteeye from Moraviantown, he came in and he says, I want to share with you a little bit about radio and some of the things you can do. Some of the things that you'll find are very fun to do. And then he told us about streeters, going out on the street. And at that time, I remember it was just prior to 1992, the quincentennial. And he says, just go out and ask people what they think about 500 years. Just go and get a cross-section of answers to that question. And boy, did we ever get quite a response. It was great. I mean, the Indigenous people's response was quite different from the non-Native people's response, but it was all, to me, it was all good. But 500 years, that we've been coexisting here, and the streeter was a whole new dimension of radio for us. And then we started doing other things that Bud advised us, that recommended us to do in radio. So it was all a lot of fun. And we have friends like Kathy Buddle, who was, at that time, she was working towards her master's, and she was listening we didn't even know this until we got to meet her, but she was listening to every show, and she recorded every show, and then she transcribed every show. And then next thing we found out was that she was actually working on her dissertation, and it was based on our show. And so we just were so flattered by that someone would consider our radio to be a basis for a dissertation, a master's dissertation, that we had to, get more involved. We started to looking for other ways of exploring radio. But radio is the oral tradition out there on the airwaves, us speaking, the audience listening. And lots of times, Mary Lou and I would just say, well, it's just like, all we're doing really is we're having a coffee table discussion, a little banter, a little laughter, because Mary Lou's got a great sense of humor. She keeps me laughing. I just love to laugh on the air. And the audience gets to hear that, and gets to hear in and eavesdrop on everything we say. And so like we're always trying to speak about things that are very topical, because everything that's happening today, we find out, are as a result of something that happened 200 years ago or longer that have been unresolved. And now it's all starting works its way through the court system all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it's the decisions that are now being made are just, some of them are very much in our favor, some aren't, but at least we're given a fair hearing, because they're starting to understand the spirit of our voice, of our people. And I'm so glad that I think one of the major changes that we got to see from radio is that the wisdom of the elders is now regarded as legitimate evidence as anything that's written down, that's been historically transcribed. The wisdom of our elders is now being recognized as being valid evidence. So we know that, so Mary Lou and I, we knew when Art used to say, it's time for us to tell our own story. It's time for them to listen. It's time for us to be heard. We said, go to the elders, just like Mary Lou's mother used to always tell her. Go to the elders and and ask the elders the questions that you have. I can't answer them. I went to residential school, so if you go and ask the elders, you're going to find some elders who know exactly the answers that you're seeking. And sure enough, there's no shortage of people out there, knowledge carriers, traditional teachers, ceremonial leaders, who have the answers. And after a while, we've started to absorb a lot of that same kind of knowledge, that knowledge system. And we're honored that our brother Cliff is in the audience here today, because he's been with us along on this journey. In fact, I remember when he was doing a doctoring of our teacher, Vern Harper, Vern asked me if I would come, and I said, sure, I'll come. I didn't know it was going to be way out by, what's that place, just off of the 401, what's it called? Oh no, it was where they were Speyside Street. There's like an institution there as well. I forget what the name of that institution is, but it's just outside of. Isn't it where Kara comes from? Wickham. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyways, we didn't even know where we were going, and then when we got there, it was after dark, so we had to literally traipse through the woods. Probably seemed like a mile into the woods, and then we finally got to the site where Cliff had his lodge, and we went in there, and we had a great medicine ceremony, and that was my first time that I ever traveled long distance like that, and then went into this unknown of these dark woods and not knowing what to expect, but it was all good. I just put my faith and my belief that everything that's going to happen is going to be good for me, and it was a good medicine for me. But and so this is where radio has taken us. And like Mary Lou said, we have been around the world. We've got to participate with Indigenous peoples in those countries, and actually be invited to their ceremonies. And whenever Mary Lou sings, the grandmothers all seem to stand up in succession. And Mary Lou was wondering, because she heard all the chairs moving behind her when she was singing to a group of Indigenous people. And she turned around, and all the grandmothers are dancing to her singing, because she was singing their drumming, and they were all getting up. The song just transfixed them and transported them to get up and dance. So radio has a way of capturing the spirit as well. The spirit becomes enveloped and just taken away. And so we thought, like I've heard people on radio do that to me. And if they can do that to me, then it can happen to any one of us to be transfixed by that. I mean, we've had people like a good friend of ours, Peter Edwards, who wrote the book on Dudley George's death at Stony Point. Peter's mother he grew up here in London, and his mother used to listen to our radio show every Sunday night for about 3 or 4 years. I was so surprised when Peter told me that. She says faithfully, sits down at her kitchen table and she sits and listens to us, Mary Louise and I, our banter and our music. And I remember when, this is just an example of the extreme. The very first time we started playing radio, we got some traditional drumming CDs, and we were playing this CD of traditional drumming. We got a phone call from a little, seemed like a little old lady listener, and she says, "Stop playing that devil's music." And we said, "What? What do you mean devil's music?" She says, "That's devil's music." I says, "No, it's actually a really well-known group. We met them down in Gathering of Nations. Remember what that drum group was? They were talking about the Dijon mustard. Whitefish Bay, the Whitefish Bay Singers. In fact, they were the champion drum for the world at the Gathering of Nations powwow in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But and I says, "We're not going to turn this music off. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is precious to us. This is sacred." And then now today, because as January said, all genres of music. I mean, opera. We have opera singers out there. We have people. The traditional people from the Inuit territories are singing their style of music, and it's all coming together and it's all being blended into this real beautiful medley of melodic sound. And we get to hear it because, as Mary Lou said, we have a media contra with all these music houses and with the musicians themselves and with these music awards shows. They send us the CDs so that we'll play them on the air and help promote their distributorship or their music awards or whatever. And for us, after a while, I think we had about 3,500 CDs, yeah. And we started off with one cassette that we played all the time for about 3 or 4 months. Yeah, so now the music is just, it's incredible. It's just incredible, the talent and the artistry and the beautiful sounds that are coming out of Indian country. Anyways, I guess I'll pass it back over to Pauline to hear from Kathy.
Team Miigwech, Dan. Before we hear from Kathy, I would like to invite Finn Rose to come up and speak. So Finn was actually a student in Indigenous Literatures of Turtle Island last year when you visited us, Dan and Mary Lou. And that's when Mary Lou talked about the newspapers that she had in boxes in her basement and how she very much wanted somebody to transcribe her articles. And so I got in touch afterwards and said, let's take that project on. And Finn came up to me after class one day and very generously volunteered their services to help with that digitizing. And so I just want to sing Finn's praises a bit here, because Finn has dedicated hours and hours of their time to acquainting themselves with these gifts of the newspapers that you've kept. Some of the Indigenous newspapers are no longer in print, and really what you have is a remarkable archive, and it has been a real learning experience for me to be able to go back and review things that were happening in the 90s and the early 2000s, and to see those events be represented from Indigenous perspectives. And I know that Finn has really enjoyed that process as well. So the culmination of Finn's work then was this semester creating the archive exhibit that we see outside. And so I'd love to hear from Finn about their work on that process.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Professor Wakeham has said just to start. So over the past year and a half, thanks to Professor Wakeham and the Smokes, I've had the privilege to work with their print journalism. And they have a wonderful physical archive, like we've said, of their published writings, and this spans over numerous years, newspapers, and provinces across Canada. And so the task was given to Professor Wakeham, myself, and a few other students to gather this all up and turn it into an organized digital archive with the hopes of meeting a wider audience. And so I'd like to take a moment here to just personally thank Dan and Mary Lou for the trust you've placed in me. And I have the highest respect for both of you and your roles as teachers. And I can only hope that you have found that trust well-founded in me. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Professor Wakeham for that same trust. So the personal experience I gained while working with these newspapers was subtle but persistent, and one that I don't really know if I can fully do justice, so bear with me while I try. So the majority of these newspapers were written around the time that I was born, not to show my age or anything. And with how fast the world moves today, it's so easy to say that these 21, 22-year-old articles just don't concern me or other people my age, but they do, and they concern everyone here and everyone. And yes, some of these articles deal with really big things, like a 230-year-old fight with the government for reserve status. And some of them do directly affect me, even if I don't really realize it, like new safety measures following 9/11. But that's not all I found in my archiving. I found how to step into someone else's shoes. I found how to be thankful and respectful, and I found how to help, but how to set boundaries. And most importantly, I found just how to love and how to just be kind. And some of this was written on the pages in front of me, but some of it was just through working with another culture's history. And I say history, but I cannot say irrelevant, because 20 years later, these are still lessons needing teaching. And 50, 100 years from now, these are lessons that will need reteaching. And we're lucky to have people like Dan and Mary Lou and January who are willing to teach us. But these lessons will only stick if you open yourself up to them, if you go and read those papers and others and think about how the recent past affects you and how you might affect the near future. And what 20 years from now would you want someone my age to take away from right now? The big things, yes, and the scary things, but also our love, just for our families, our cultures, our histories, and each other, and our love for sharing all of this with each other. And learning from someone, regardless of their family or history or culture, is indispensable. So I'd like to thank Dan and Mary Lou again for the opportunity they offer, not only to myself, but to Turtle Island as a whole, for the opportunity to learn and gain an understanding. And I want to thank all of you for taking that opportunity and for being here and listening and reading and learning from the people who have so much to offer. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was wonderful. And so now we are thrilled to hear from Kathy Buddle, who is joining us from Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'll be with you in one moment. I hope you can all hear me all right. I'm doing the radio thing and hiding behind a PowerPoint presentation. C'est bon, bonjour. I'm so grateful to be here with y'all today. I'm speaking from Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibway, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the heartland of the Métis people. I wanted to first begin by offering my congratulations again to doctors Mary Lou and Dan on their recent and long overdue accolades from Western University. Programs like Smoke Signals and Indigenous media more generally continue to be employed very strategically, sometimes to amplify and to transmit, and sometimes to deflect and shield, and to both station and stream locally meaningful modes of discretionary sharing. Working like controlled fires that clear the brush and prepare the terrain for new growth. Smoke Signals rejuvenates fallow journalistic fields, recentering the mediascape by undermining dominant social codes and legitimized subject positions, as well as institutionalized relations and hierarchies. The intense relational labor this requires is absolutely essential to the prefiguring of Indigenous futurities. It is what makes the pursuit of Indigenous-led trajectories into the future possible. Smoke Signals takes land-based teaching into the sky world. Canadian progress has historically been tied to infrastructural development, roads, railways, and now broadband networks. Yet techno-political relations between the state and Indigenous communities in Canada have and continue to be marked by structural violence, inequity, and by multiple intersecting and invasive incursions by the state into the substrata of sovereign Indigenous territories via pipelines, cables, sewers, and wires, and the superstrata through airwaves, satellite systems, and other forms of air traffic. Rather than improving the flow or unfettering communications, these state-led incursions have upheld the biopolitical agenda of controlling and gatekeeping information and of diverting othered communications or other communicatory pathways. Even today, Indigenous media activists assert that their lived realities are the products of dissonant patterns of circulation and of obstructed efforts to position themselves not only in, but as the centers of decision-making. So, as is often the case, but especially among those historically silenced classes who have been coerced into subject positions, administrative regimes, and geographies of others' making, the airwaves seem to offer otherwise unavailable possibilities for the forging of alternative relational infrastructures. as places and as socio-technical practices for performing relationships between the self, land and family, the community, the nation, time, knowledge, and all that is encompassed in the grand project we all work on throughout our lives, what Paulo Freire refers to as the labor of becoming human. Indigenous radiophony becomes important not merely as a delivery vehicle or conduit for the transmission of information, but as an action zone in and of itself. This is because people's ideas about all things related to being human in relation to all else, the ideas they use to shape themselves into matter and which direct their actions and practices in the world, also continue to be shaped in their encounter with technologies like radio. As you're all well aware, Dan and Mary Lou's radio program Smoke Signals is currently the longest running Indigenous radio program in Canadian history. That an archive of this work is now being commemorated for posterity is a testament to the cumulative labors of Indigenous resistors who have been fighting for centuries to be heard on their own terms, to be seen, and to be freed to determine their own life courses. This work carries forward the work of runners, criers, the first Indigenous newspaper producers in the 19th century, of the political leaders who made radio appeals for justice directly to the King of England, and the many who traveled to Europe to perform the earliest forms of reality TV prior to any form of broadcasting, to people like Jay Silverheels and the many mediated personalities who attempted to infiltrate the inner sanctums of media power to produce change from within. Moments like Smoke Signals are many lifetimes in the making. First met Dan and Mary Lou in 1991, shortly after they began broadcasting at UW Campus Radio. I had recently moved there from Montreal, where I had lived during the years leading up to and during the Kanehsatake crisis. I learned that Dan was a Princeton-educated scholar, and Mary Lou was a world-famous performer. I couldn't imagine why they would want to bother with a no account like me. But we met and just kind of struck a good chord, I guess. It was a kind of a strong medicine, I think. And in our work together, I was with them for many years, and then we kept in touch for many years after. One of the first things I quickly learned was that whether it's for their print, radio, or television work, Dan and Mary Lou invest extraordinary amounts of time and energy in the preparatory work necessary for putting together and disseminating teachings in a variety of forms. And much of this is in the form of relational labor. This is the labor that is required to build relationships of trust with people from whom they sought pedagogic and other forms of information, as well as those with whom they wanted to share this information. So this means attending and organizing many ceremonies and community events. It meant applying their trainings from experiences like traveling with the White Roots of Peace, gifting, feasting, offering, listening, learning through doing, singing, drumming and dancing, praying, thinking critically and reflecting, and always being there to share and co-create the experiences that were happening, and then relating all of this through land. Their interviews were partly driven, obviously, by events. Oops, I'm a little bit behind. They knew they had to be on site and alongside the people of Kettle and Stony Point in 1992 for the delivery of the eviction notice to Camp Ipperwash officials. But attending and covering this event in a culturally and historically informed and appropriate manner took years of hard work and sacrifice to prepare for. When Mary Lou and Dan share their own stories and accumulated wisdom, these two are not one-off cheeky tweets or 30-second verbal selfies on Instagram. What they're sharing is the product of deliberative and intensive investigative reporting and thoughtful oratory performance that must be worthy of the investments their teachers have made in them and to whom they are accountable. What might be difficult for some to imagine today is the ecology of communications in the early 1990s, during which time Mary Lou and Dan began broadcasting. Quick and open access to information and knowledge were very far from the norm. The official organs for transmitting news and other forms of information, much like the legal system and other institutions of governance, were not critically culturally reflexive and invariably centered a normative, heterosexual, Anglo-Saxon, propertied, and able-bodied male, invisible subject as the representative for all Canadian peoples. Mainstream producers and gatekeepers of information spoke to this subject and spoke from this subject position. The more expansive media networks we see today, for instance, NCI in Manitoba and AMSA, Aboriginal Multimedia Society of Alberta, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, and so on, were only in their early formation stages. There was no national Indigenous broadcasting service of any sort, and little space was made in the mainstream for Indigenous knowledges, historicities, news reporting, or storytelling, or for Indigenous people's participation in telling Canadian stories to the mainstream. Miles Morrisseau, who founded and served as the managing editor of Native Beat newspaper, was a former CBC journalist and a graduate of the Native journalism program at Western, who, despite his persistent requests, had been prohibited by CBC senior executives from reporting on the Kanehsatake crisis, owing to what he was told was his presumed bias as an Indigenous reporter. This was the climate in which smoke signals began. The circumstances we find ourselves in today are partly owing to the work of people like Mary Lou and Dan and January, who have sacrificed throughout their lives to bring this new reality into existence. Among the many, many accomplishments of smoke signals, inviting the sometimes alienated members of urban Indigenous communities into the fold and readying them to feel comfortable in those spaces was among the most critical. This unique form of radiophony afforded Dan and Mary Lou with, a culturally safe place from which to issue these cultural expressions, but it offered their listeners and audiences who were co-producers safe spaces in which to receive them, producing public transmissions which were often consumed in the most intimate of circumstances. Where radio used to be consumed mostly in the home or car or sometimes, boom boxes, the smoke's embodied voices today are combined with cell phone technology that is often worn on the body, played on the move, and thought of as part of the person, both physically and psychically, thus merging self and machine, carried via the internet to everywhere the internet now goes, and with computer-generated linguistic translation capabilities that make it even more accessible. The scale of their reach is now impossible to measure. bundling ways of perceiving, thinking, being, and doing, Indigenous radiophony remains an important assemblage of cultural processes that are neither handed down unchanged from one generation to the next, nor merely straightforwardly introduced from one cultural context to another. Smoke signals continues to be radically reinvented within the material, cultural, and performative practice of each new Indigenous generation and each new cultural setting in which it is consumed. Before his untimely passing, Greg Young-Ing spoke at the 2019 Indigenous Gathering in Ottawa. He said, quote, "It doesn't really matter which medium we use or how much information we preserve if we don't train kids how to think properly. What is important is maintaining the traditional means of transmission and relationality. If people follow the traditions, they will learn all of this information anyway through the land." End of quote. Today, there's approximately 250 independently operating Indigenous community radio stations in Canada, and there are many more Indigenous programs that are disseminated via university stations or podcasts or through other media. Despite its ethereality, community radio producers across Turtle Island often contend that radio extends their capacities for being on and connecting with the land and with each other. Whether it's in the north or cities in the south, Indigenous radiophony continues to operate as a life-sustaining sonic circuitry that enables extended Indigenous families to remain in oral reach, despite that family members are increasingly uprooted from homes and territory, and despite that information is increasingly detached from author and place. Smoke Signals Radio represents the epitome of transistor resistance, extending Indigenous selves, families, communities, and territories beyond boundaries that have been fixed by Canadian colonial projects. Dan and Mary Lou's radio and television work provides spaces for Indigenous fact-checking, for meaning unpacking, for a kind of perspectival accounting that disrupts the architecture of circulation of fake news and the projects of other making that inform the stories mainstream Canada tells itself about itself in relation to its others. Stories of progress, civilization, and development. Overcoming and organizing against this discursive violence is no easy feat, considering how deeply these ideas have become sedimented into the public psyche and stuck under the skin of the body politic. In closing, what Mary Lou and Dan offer through Smoke Signals is a medicine for community healing. Their connective work is restructuring and restoring the spectrum of cultural knowledge and memory production. And it is retuning in the process our notions of accountability. If I had to sum up what I learned and keep learning from Smoke Signals, it is that becoming more human means being more accountable to all our relations. This requires we think with and through our relations with each other and with land, and that we learn, ultimately, how to let land speak through our being. Miigwech. Nawe.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So now I think we have a few minutes for Q&As from the audience. If there are any questions for January or Dan or Mary Lou, we're happy to hear them. Okay, yeah, in the back. We can hear you.
Yeah, actually, they're each Indigenous community, each band has their own wavelength, FM wavelength, through the CRTC. A lot of them are aware of that and have taken advantage of that, like Six Nations. That's a strictly different situation because that's like a pirate radio station, CKRZ, and they pretty much can say and do whatever they're not regulated by the CRTC.
We are.
And then,
we are.
Oh, you are? Oh, you are now? Oh, okay. Because I remember in the day when they weren't, and Amos Key was so proud of that, and Gary Farmer was so proud of that. Yeah. So okay, I guess they're now licensed by the CRTC, but a lot of the communities can access a radio program license through the CRTC because there is an FM wavelength dedicated to each one of the communities. So around here, I know Oneida has one. That's pirate radio. I know they are. Chippewas of the Thames doesn't have one. Muncie, Delaware doesn't have one. Actually, not too many of them have them except for Walpole Island. Kettle Point has one. I thought Sarnia did, but they don't have one either. So it's pretty much on the computer that you're going to have to listen to any local broadcasts. But I'll tell you, I was talking to January the other night at right here actually, and we were talking about Radio Bingo. And Radio Bingo is alive and well in Indian country, in radio listening country all over North America. I mean, it's the biggest form of fundraising, really. And I remember Charlie Hill. I don't know if you ever heard of Charlie Hill, the Oneida comedian. He was on Johnny Carson a few times, but he used to do a real good skit about bingo and then apply it to Radio Bingo. And Radio Bingo really is pretty big. I mean, a lot of radio stations wouldn't survive without it. And it's interesting because, for example, out here at Oneida, the people who are listening in on Radio Bingo are not only the Oneida people, but their neighbors who live outside of Oneida. And when they come in to, and it's interesting because all the numbers are done in Oneida language. So the people who are listening learn how to do the numbers from 1 to 75. And they're so proud of it. It's interesting. They're proud of it. They come onto the reserve to collect their winnings, and they start speaking a little bit of Oneida that they've learned. And sometimes people will say to them, "Hey, speak English." I thought that was funny when my friend Glenn was telling me about that. But so it really is. I think being able to teach Oneida, through Radio Bingo is just great, fascinating, beautiful.
Sirius XM has an Indigenous station. So if you are a subscriber to Sirius XM Canada, there's, I think it's called Indigenous Waves. I'm not sure. And Kim Wheeler actually curates the music on that program and storytelling. And then where I plug in is with One Dish, One Mic, which is a once a week Saturday morning live broadcast, which actually comes out of Niagara area, but it's Carl Dockstader and Sean Vanderklees, and so it's One Dish, One Mic. It's the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee hosts, and that show actually went from a podcast to a broadcast, and now you can listen. They reach all the way down into Windsor, and so that's Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. till noon. And I listen through, and you can listen to them on the radio live or through iHeartRadio if you have that app. But I listen through I'm going to share a wonderful website with everybody. It's called Radio Garden. And you can listen to stations from all over the world on that thing. Like anywhere in the world that has a broadcast radio station, you can listen in. You just plug it in. And so that's how I listen. And there's lots. You just need to do the search. There's lots of Native radio out there, and even more Native podcasts that you can listen to. Tons.
Yes, Lisa.
Lisa? Mm-hmm.
Just for those of us who are on Zoom, I've been requested to repeat the question. I don't think I can do justice to your eloquence, Lisa, but the question is about Dan and Mary Lou's aspirations for engaging Indigenous youth through smoke signals and radio.
Well, we've been trying to encourage youth to go into radio, to learn the teachings, but it's not a really good income in radio. So it's something that somebody could do on a part-time basis. We've been asked recently to host a group of youth from the Chippewa Reserve who want to come to London, and they want us to take them on a tour of the CBC radio station and talk about our days in the radio. So I would encourage them to do that because it's a good way to learn about the teachings. It's a good way to gain some confidence. It's a good way to get known out there, and it's just a good thing to do, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know when we started out, everything was analog. Nothing was digital. So we had to do the old style of cutting and pasting when it came to editing. So that was tedious, time-consuming. Yeah, splicing. And so when the digital world came, I mean, that was a real time saver. I mean, it was just so welcoming, and everything has sped up. And during that time, there's been a lot of other kinds of technology that for recording audio that have been made available, but they only seem to last for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then it goes on to the next recording technology to record audio. So, I mean, we're comfortable with any digital recorders because we started off with just a simple audio cassette recorder. I forget what kind it was. Remember the name of it? Yeah, it was just a simple one. And the lady who gave it to us, she was a professor at the journalism school, and she says, "Here, I want you to have this. Do good radio." And when we found out the quality of the sound, like she did a lot of her shows on ideas, CBC ideas, and I thought, wow, this is great. And then it sort of it made us want to do good radio because we had a good piece of technology to record, and and that really helps. After a while, we started asking around, where can we get funding? Who can fund us? Like we're good sources of funding. And I'll never forget. We went to a conference in Bellingham, Washington, and that same journalism professor was teaching in Bellingham, and she brought us over. And the fellow that I was traveling with from Toronto across to Vancouver, and then we rented a vehicle to go to Bellingham. He says, "Well, why don't you ask the Quakers, the Society of Friends?" And they said, "I never even thought of them." He says, "Yeah, ask them and see if they can help you." And they not only rallied, but they got other ecumenical groups to help us. And next thing I know, we had these editing machines, we had technology that just helped us so much do the kind of work that we wanted to do. And Kathy helped us a lot too, because she was able to write proposals for us. Good proposal writer. And so that's how it took off. And we're so grateful to all those people out there who have helped us along the way and continue to help us. Because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be where we're at today. And we truly believe that.
Thank you. Any final questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Dan, Mary Lou, and January. And I'd also like to say special words of thanks to Josh Lambier and Words Festival. I'd also like to thank Museum London and the Faculty of Information and Media Studies and the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Western. Thank you.
Oh,
Miigwech.